The opinions expressed in the following audio does not represent High Media or its advertisers. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the High Soapbox. I am joined today by the lovely Miss Kadi Davison.
Hey.
So I wanted to actually probe you a little bit about. I actually wanted to probe you a little bit about your knowledge, a little bit about music industry and stuff like that. But before, what's a little bit of your history in the music scene usually?
Well, my dad is known as the King. He raised me on classic rock, music knowledge, behind the music, everything that has to do with the music industry. I would get quizzes in the car on, who's this artist? He would tell me about how the Beatles recorded 2 instruments in one speaker, 2 in the other. And we would switch between both sides of the speaker in the car. And we would listen to the snare and the drum and then the bass and the whatever was going on at the time in the song. And he would, give me information on the Beatles and everything like that. And, so I grew up just having a passion for the music industry. Just innately. Genetically, innately, and everything. And I just, I dabbled in a few instruments here or there. Never really played anything. I could do the drums, but I always saw them on the weekends, so I never really had time to
truly practice.
So throughout the years, I've just, developed a natural musical style, rock and roll kind of style. I do rock and roll hair for a living. That's the kind of style that I do. And I've dated a lot of musicians. I've dated a lot of musicians and I've helped them do bigger things with their music, because it's just that's what my dad would have wanted, kind of deal. And that's what, all the knowledge that I've learned, that's people would want.
So the question I ask, so you say you worked with certain artists in the past and stuff. So what were some of the things you did for them to help their success?
Well, that's funny you ask that. A lot of the things in the past to help their success, a lot of things were me being their inspiration to create.
Amuse.
I've been severely burnt in this industry. People would get mad at me, like to watch me get mad, like to watch me fume, use that energy of their ego and anger to go create and leave me to be alone. I've had people cheat on me and lie and scheme on me and use me for prayer. I've had, I've had a man almost give up his music career for me, and just live a life of 9 to 5. And I said, I don't want you to give that up. We're just not compatible. And, if I'm growing in my hair business and you're not growing in your music business, it's just not going to work. I've broken up with people because of that. I had a man who was a rapper who got a job as a mainstream podcast medium, about politics and hip hop. He got that job, and I was his inspiration. I was his motivation. And but he treated me like my actions and my activism wasn't a part of his formula. Like he was sitting on his own dick, thinking that he's the one who did everything, and he's the one who did this, and he's the one who did that. Meanwhile, his show's about politics and hip hop, and the only thing I talk to him about is politics and hip hop. It's like I was his inspiration for everything, yet when I went to tell him my 2 cents about how I think something should be done, he would talk to me like my shit didn't fucking matter. I would try to cook for him. Now he's got a nutritionist, which I'm grateful for. I wanted that man to be healthy. I loved him. I loved him so much, but he really...
if you've ever felt love for somebody, you never stop feeling for them, at least a small part.
He would never commit to me, and he used my energy and sucked my spirit dry. But he would never tell you that. But that's what he did. Eminem dropped an album on his birthday, and literally took over my ex-boyfriend's soul. His rap name was Knife, Dope Knife. And Eminem's in recovery, and Eminem's got, pharmaceutical background and his conspiracy rap life. And
we'll go into that a little later.
Yeah, and he kind of just, he said, bitch, if you're not going to respond to me in a rap like your girlfriend's been saying, I'm going to just fucking steal your soul. Because throughout the duration of me and my last boyfriend's relationship, I said, yo, Eminem called you out in kickoff after I did a sex magic spell at a club. So I did a sex magic sacrificial spell, and it conjured this whole freestyle. But anyways, that's a music industry thing. But anyways, there was like a part in kickoff that said, "Tell me about your dope hood," and what I did is you said, "Yo, Mac, listen to this." I said, "From this second to this second, Eminem's calling you out." Well, Dope Knife never fucking rap battled him back. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, what's your problem? And so this guy would go out and focus on his comic book and his trying to manage himself and going up to Ohio for rap battles. Meanwhile, I'm at my house rap battling Eminem for him just because it's fun. But, enough is enough. And Eminem dropped the album on his birthday and said, physical murder is not the goal, but spiritual murder is. And I believe Eminem has had a murder problem in the past, but a lot of rappers have. A lot of musicians have. Johnny Depp was a murderer. Johnny Depp got away with murder. I was watching a documentary on Dark Hollywood about that. Yeah, so I've been in the industry, in my adult life, in the local music scene and in the industry a little bit for the past 5 years, as somebody who is a mentor, a spiritual healer, and a girlfriend. And I still have that reputation, making moves. I still know other artists and entertainers. But at the end of the day, what really matters to me is the difference that I'm making behind the music.
Right.
And the activism behind it. Like I said, I was raised on the Beatles. John Lennon, Yoko Ono, like the peace, like a give peace a chance kind of thing. You can be an asshole and still have peace at the same time kind of deal. And, when it came to liberating me in each of those previous failed partnerships, they kept me behind closed doors because they're both from the South. They're like this fucking misogynistic fucking man cult. And I'm just like, I'm like, you're not going to invite me out to a show. I can't, help you advertise, and I just kind of had like enough is enough kind of thing. I talk to other artists now online, and I got some artist friends that I see. But, I'm going to be saying, but it's just like, I never deserved to be stepped on for as long as I've been stepped on for. It's like,
well, nobody is.
Yeah. And, the music industry, I have a passion for. I have a passion for the lifestyle. Sex, CBD, and music. You don't need all the drugs for it, but, I have a passion for the lifestyle. The rock and roll lifestyle.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, sex could be considered a drug within itself.
But at the end of the day, you don't got to get specific. There's just the formula for anything
that releases dopamine, I think could be considered a drug because, like,
I feel like anything that releases dopamine is considered good for you.
Yeah, but is it earned dopamine?
Exactly. It has to be earned dopamine. I've said this time and time again throughout my recovery that sometimes it takes time to build up happiness and dopamine. Yeah. And
because let's be real, like I feel like for a lot of people, like, motherfuckers ain't out here whacking off or anything or masturbating or just because they want to feel good. We're doing that shit to sleep. Like, right. It's really just like, I don't know. It's and
sex is one of those things that's really important. Sex is powerful. Sex is very, very, very powerful.
I had a conversation. I was actually down doing my writings the other night down at one of the bars around here, and I ran into two women that were there, like the coworkers or something. One was a younger girl, closer to my age, mixed girl, big girl, pretty, very pretty,
Mm-hmm.
and then the other was like a skinny older woman in
Mm-hmm.
her mid, who like looked younger, but she's like in her 30s, but she's actually in her 40s. Skinny, also quite pretty,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like we were just talking about stuff, and we eventually got on like the topic of sex, and I realized there was a generational thing because the 40-something-year-old was like, oh, if you want me to go down on you, you got to do all XYZ for me. You got to do all this stuff. I'm just like, meanwhile, me and the other chick who are like closer in age are just like, yo, I just like I like she liked sucking dick, and I like eating pussy just because like there's something emotionally viable about seeing your partner feel good. You know, you may not get direct pleasure from it, but
no, there's definitely an empathic connection.
Right. It's like I've had partners in the past who are just who say, oh, you don't have to do anything that you know, and I'm just like, no, I want to. Like, it's like I like making people feel like I'm making somebody I'm having that level of emotional and physical intimacy with feel good. And I find that funny how like I hear a lot of older comedians, like female and male, talk about how like sex sucks with their spouse and how like they'll never have like get finished or anything. I'm just like, it makes me realize
you have to finish in order to make a change. If you're not coming, you're not going. As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. But back to the music industry.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, I guess it's recent in my current history and in my past, and I'm recovering more from the emotional stuff rather than the fact that it's an industry thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some people would give their left arm to be in the music industry. I was just born into it.
Well, nowadays it's not as hard as it used to be.
It's not.
I mean, with the
but it's hard to be mainstream and be wholesome, because there's a lot of black magic that goes into the mainstream music industry. And my ex-rapper boyfriend, let me tell you, wasn't dark alone. I did some dark magic, but most of my magic was activism magic to help combat some of the oppression and hatred. Mostly hatred in the air. Mm-hmm. And I one day I just said, I don't want to do this black magic anymore. I said, I just really don't want to do this for you anymore. I said, I don't want to do this for you anymore, because everything I did for him made him famous, and he never fucking acknowledged me. And I broke up with him, and I told him off. It's not the only thing that made him famous, but it was the thing that set it off. And, you know, and he never, you know, said thank you. You know, he took a gemstone from my car one time, and before I left, and smiled. You know, because we had just gotten back together or something at that
Mm-hmm.
point. But there was never any appreciation. There was no I love yous. There was no you're pretty. You know, it was just me. I need to get off, and I'm gonna fuck you. And I needed that at the time. I needed a rebound. He was a rebound. Let's be honest. And I was a rebound for him. Let's be honest. But we rebounded and we rebounded and bounced into greater heights, which is great. You know, it's just when it comes to the black magic of the music industry, it's kind of like what I said about Mickey Faust. I just don't really believe in having to kill somebody to see somebody else succeed. You know, I don't believe in that. You know, and you know, rap is kind of cyclic. You know, hip hop is kind of cyclic. You know, you talk about one thing, then you refer back to the first chorus to finish out the conclusion. You know, so you know, black magic and rap is one of those things that Eminem pioneered in the 90s and such. And you know, I brought it back a little bit And, it's just, it's interesting. But at the end of the day, it's like if you're doing something dark, do it for a good purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Shit started to pop off with him with his racial vibes towards white people. And then he watches the news like 12 hours a day, man, like it's a job. And it kind of is a job.
Well, I mean, if he's a political rapper...
He's a political rapper, but he's not an activist. He made that clear to me. He said, I'm not an activist. And when he told me that, that was the final straw that broke the camel's back. Because I'm like, how can you be a political rapper and not an activist? I said, do you mean to tell me that I'm the one doing all the spiritual work on my own? Because at that point I was. At that point he stopped doing all his spiritual work and put the whole prayer team on my shoulders. And in the South, a prayer team for an entertainer is a huge thing. Every entertainer has a prayer team. Destiny's Child has a prayer team. Michelle is actually singing for a church now, from what I've heard. And especially in the African American communities. And he put the whole load on me. And then had the nerve to say racist white jokes about me. And call his predecessor, not predecessor, that's the wrong word, that's what he would want me to say, and to call the person who discovered him racist in the process. And, I understand at the time that political tensions were high. Donald Trump was being manipulative. But this man fell into that man's trap. And he was never like that in the beginning. And, he fell into the racist trap. Mm-hmm. And I alerted the entertainer that he said was racist instantly. And I said, this is what's going on, and this isn't cool. Like, I'm done with him. And, so we've been working to heal that man. But some people just need to be torn into to sew him back up and heal. Yeah. Metaphorically.
The problem with that, though, that little last snippet you said, I will say, like...
It's kind of like going in surgery and taking out some cancer and sewing you back up.
The problem...
It gets aggressive, and it gets dirty, but then you're clean afterwards.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I will say about that last snippet is... It's hard to tear into somebody when their ego or they're so in a hole that they don't hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and it and I get, and a lot of that does come with creative focus. Mm-hmm. You're in the focus, you're in the drive, you're pushing your way to the top. Mm-hmm. But when someone has something valuable to say, or you want to recognize that. You want to recognize that. And, I didn't get him to the top. Like, I'm there. I'm right there with him. We're both right here. We're both at about the same level in the hip-hop community right now. Oh. And a lot of it was because I loved him. It wasn't like, oh, I just wanted to be famous.
It was your partner.
He was my partner. And I was never good enough for him, I was never good enough for him. I was always to this or to that. But instead of him outwardly, verbally saying, hey, Katie, I would like to make you my main. Do you mind cleaning up your social media? And maybe we can work something out. Or do you want to come do a show? And, maybe we can hook up with people like you kind of do in your open lifestyle in Tallahassee. None of that. He kept me in a fucking closet like R. Kelly did, basically. I felt like I was trapped in a closet doing metaphysics and magic without any thank yous.
So... What I find interesting, the fact that you're willing to...
because hip-hop is a faith. Hip-hop isn't only an artistic outlet. Hip-hop is a faith. And, and when you're someone coming from a privileged private school background like Mac is, Dope Knife is, when you're coming from a privileged background like that...
He's from Tallahassee or from Wilmington?
He's not from either of them. He I think he was born in D.C. and he lived over in Africa for a while. His mom was an activist, refugee activist, mm-hmm. and his dad got murdered. And it's a terrible story. And it's a terrible story. And I treated him like a PTSD doctor, witch doctor would treat a patient. I gave him massages. I cooked for him. I bought him gummy worms. I was so sweet to that man, and I loved him. But over time, I took his fight onto me, and I fought right there with him. And that's what I do for my partners, you know? That's what I do for my partners. But like I said, hip hop is a faith. And, you know, he didn't grow up in this country, so he's kind of blind to a lot of the things that hip hop actually is. He just considered himself a businessman and thought that, like, only black people did black magic. When I say black magic, I don't mean black magic. I mean, like, African American root stuff. You know, and I learned that at an early age through some of my close African American friends. And I don't even like to have to say, oh, my African American friend, but just to give you a picture and an idea and an image of where I came from and all that. And so this man was like discounting over time all the things that I did, you know, and it's crazy because the first thing that I said to this man when I met him was, hey, can I get a cigarette and light it with your matches? And he had like an evil smile come over his face, and he was like, yes. And you know, that was the start of our whole rendezvous. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it just ended with me saying, you know, I originally said, hey, if you want to come over for a plate, that's fine. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I can't do it anymore. But then I had some woman complications, and I was like, hold up. But, you know, I think we were sabotaged, ultimately. I think Marshall Mathers sabotaged us from a spiritual perspective. Eminem. I think Eminem sabotaged me and Kendrick Mack. Me and Kendrick Mack's relationship.
Do you think it was intentional?
I think it was intentional.
Okay.
I don't think anyone expected me to break up with him, but I'm not going to stay with somebody just because they might become famous. Like, that's not love to me.
I have friends who I've had friends I've had to forego in the past, even though that some of them were now very successful, just because just hanging out with them didn't make me feel good, and it wasn't conducive to my own success.
Yeah, my heart felt like it was in stitches, you know, towards the end there, and you know, I've made sacrifices to be with that man.
Love kind of sucks, doesn't it?
No, I love love.
In the sense of, when I say love sucks, I mean it's great when you're in the throes of it, but you know, it's always wanting to talk to this person, always wanting to be around them, but because life is life, you're not able to. I feel like, despite how empowering it can be at times, the hurt you get day to day and the hurt when it's ripped away is. At least, maybe because I'm a little bit of a nihilist, it makes me nervous about falling in love again. I guess.
I believe it's better to love and keep than to love and lose. You know, I never stopped loving any of my ex-boyfriends. Because love never dies, and to say that you don't, you know, it's a force. It's force.
I mean, every ex I've ever had, like, I still feel a little bit. Every person I've ever loved, I still feel for. You know, it's like it's not as powerful or passionate as it used to be. It's maybe just a small microcosm, but it's there. It's like if my ex-girlfriend came up to me tomorrow and said, I made a mistake and I want to get back together, it would hurt, but I wouldn't do it because I knew going back into that wouldn't be positive.
Right. You know, and I know that, you know, I knew that at the end of my last relationship that I was never going to be respected the way that I wanted to be respected. I was never going to be seen as anything more than a slave wife.
And it's there. I know some women that are okay with the concept of having some guy work all day long to pay all their bills and her responsibilities, house clean, cook, suck his dick before bed, and that's it. And some are fine with that. I know other girls who want...
Right, and I like that kind of shit.
Right,
it just depends upon the person.
But it depends on that. It also depends on that person's ambition.
Exactly. What is their goal? What is their MO? And if your MO isn't even isn't like at least 30% aligned with mine, it ain't gonna work. You know, if you're, you know, there were moments where our creative vision just felt like a race war, and I was just like, look, this is not what this is. And he was more Malcolm, I was more Martin, and I just didn't want to go through that.
Yeah, I you know, given where we were, where the country
not
was.
In a relationship, in a friendship, that's fine. You know, we'll talk about it, we'll collaborate. You know, we'll promote peace within our communities.
Well, one of the things I've started doing is that I realize that I do myself now when I'm talking to my friends and talking to like referencing my friends. You know, the one thing I try not to reference anymore is race, because at the end of the day, the race of the person doesn't matter. It's the content of their character.
Right, exactly like I said, only using the term African American to describe the image when I'm talking about a story. You know, that's the only really time you should talk about someone's skin color or ethnicity. Is
honestly,
if you're describing a cultural background or
right. If it has to do with culture, yeah, it's different. Yeah. But I'm just like,
you can't erase culture. You can't put everybody on the same page. Like, oh, we're all one, happy family, Michael Jackson. Doesn't work. You know, but you can. You know, just say, oh, that person's African American. Oh, that person's Italian. Oh, that person's Irish. You know, oh, that person's Southern white. Oh, that person's Northern conservative. You know, and it's just, at the end of the day, it's just like a demographic, and it's not really like an end all be all like label.
Yeah.
You know, use your common sense. You know, people don't gotta get so offended at the smallest things. You know, no. You know, sometimes life is sensitive. You may be going through something, and it might trigger you or something. But overall, no. You know, don't. You know, it's just like.
And on that happy note, ladies, and on that bit of wisdom, I mean to say, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the High Soapbox. I'm fat.
I'm fat too. PH fat.
Yeah. Hey, at least it looks better on you than it does me. But the point is, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the High Soapbox. I'm joined by the beautiful Miss Kadi Davison. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will see you guys in the next episode.